This episode is brought to you by Education Perfect, a complete teaching and learning toolkit built to support Canadian classrooms. Education Perfect empowers educators to track progress, personalize learning, and support purposeful practice. It's easy to use, flexible, and designed to help Canadian teachers amplify their impact in the classroom. See for yourself and book a free demo today at educationperfect.com.
I guess something that really kind of struck me is the idea of it's important to have ideals and that ideals matter. But I actually think that ideals matter. They should be that creative what if. What if we could create a school in which every student felt welcome, teachers were feeling confident and good with the work that they're doing? What if every student felt like when they walked in the building they were loved? What if? What if that's our creative ideal?
Welcome to the Education Matters podcast. My guest today is Dr. Browne, Director of Education and CEO of the Toronto Catholic District School Board, the largest publicly funded Catholic school board in the world, with nearly 200 schools and over 88,000 students, and one of the most diverse and complex urban education systems in Canada. But if you're expecting a conversation about bureaucracy, budgets, and top-down mandates, you're in for something else entirely. Brendan brings both a rare humility and intellectual depth to our conversation about leadership. Trained in literature and drawn to philosophy, he sees ideas not as abstractions, but as blueprints, ideals, as he calls them, that guide real action. With more than 28 years in public education, he's advanced work in equity, mental health, student well-being, and inclusive education. He holds a PhD in educational studies with a research focus on invitational leadership and is a published author and contributor to educational journals and leadership modules. Under his leadership, the TCDSB has launched a suite of intentional frameworks, including its multi-year strategic plan, equity action plan, and mental health action plan. He served on the board of Bethany Kids Hospital in Kenya, helping support vulnerable children and families beyond his immediate community. Dr. Browne also serves as board member of the Collegium at St. Michael's College, the University of Toronto, and the chair of the Appointments Committee. He is also a member of Ontario's Provincial Leadership Committee for School Mental Health, collaborating on province-wide strategies to strengthen student support. In our conversation, we talk about what it means to lead through complexity without losing sight of human connection. Brendan shares insights from his doctoral work on invitational leadership and reflects on the importance of designing systems that invite staff, students, and families in with purpose and clarity. We discuss why authenticity and values alignment are more important now than ever. And we also touch on parenting, the mental health crisis, and why he believes that part of a district leader's job is to protect the creative spark in others, even when the system pulls towards compliance. We started this episode off with his beautiful metaphor about kites and freedom and structure, and I think that captures Brendan's approach perfectly. He wants his community to soar, but he's also thinking deeply about the structures that keep them connected. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Brendan Browne. Brendan, welcome to the podcast. Where does this podcast find you today?
Hey, Jason, I'm in my office, where I always am, it seems like.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful office for those watching on the YouTube channel.
Yeah, it's. I spend so much time here, it might as well be comfortable to some extent.
I'm certain a lot of great meetings happen there. Well, Brendan, I wanted to start by diving into your background, but can you maybe just start for the audience, give the audience a sense of your current role and what you're up to these days?
I'm the Director of Education in the Toronto Catholic District School Board. So Director of Education in Ontario is the CEO of the school board. So we are the largest Catholic school board in the world. We're 200 schools, but 90,000 students across the city of Toronto. So Tobago to Scarborough and Lake Ontario up to the York region. And my responsibility is, as the CEO, is to be overseeing all aspects of the business side and the logistics, as well as the academic and the student learning.
And for those in the audience that are from outside of Canada, which is a growing part of the audience, which is exciting to say, Ontario, I believe it's Saskatchewan, and what's the other province? Alberta, have the unique public Catholic system. So you're not part of, just so they know that you're not part of a private system, part of the public
Right.
education
Yeah,
system here in
we're
Ontario.
publicly funded. These are publicly run schools. We do answer to the Ministry of Education. It's just the way that it's set up in Ontario based on Confederation, based on when the country came together with French and Catholic, and the compromise of Confederation resulted in providing for Catholic schools, English Catholic, English public, French Catholic, and French public, but all publicly funded within Ontario.
Thanks for that context, Brendan. Now, you and I met when you were at TDSB. Have you always been a Toronto guy? Like, is that where you were born and raised?
No, I'm from the suburbs. I'm from Burlington. Grew up in Burlington, born and raised there. And I was there until I went away to school. So I left for school, went to school in Kingston. And then after that, when I got home from school, I pretty much moved to Toronto. But however, I spent most of my career actually in Halton Catholic. So I moved to Toronto, and I was commuting from the city out to where I was from, which was Burlington area. So Halton would be Burlington, Oakville, Mississauga, Georgetown. So for international audiences, it's basically the suburbs between Toronto and Hamilton in Ontario. So yeah, I was a teacher there. I was a special education teacher. I was a vice principal of 3 schools. I was a principal in 2 schools. One school as a principal at was 450 students. The other school as a principal at was 1,200 students up in Milton, when they kept building houses faster than we could build schools. I was a superintendent in Halton Catholic, superintendent of special education there as well. And so that was about 21 years in Halton Catholic. Actually, I would go back 1 year. I did actually spend my first year in Hamilton Catholic. So I was actually an LTO. So we call it long-term occasional. I was a temporary teacher in a classroom in Hamilton for my first year, but I got my first permanent job in Halton, and I stayed for most of my career there. Superintendent of Spec Ed, and then the opportunity to take on a big role in the Toronto District Board, which is the largest, I think the 3rd largest school board in North America. And the opportunity to be contributing to some significant change there was really enticing. So I moved to the Toronto District School Board. I was there for 2 years before becoming the director here in Toronto Catholic. So this is my 6th year in Toronto Catholic. So it feels like it's gone by in a blur. COVID was obviously an interesting time, and then post-COVID, and here we are now. But I'm really proud to be here. I love the work we're doing at Toronto Catholic. I love our team, and I know that the work that we do matters. I think it's because we're the center in Ontario and Canada of the media and that sort of thing. When we do things, it actually makes a difference.
Yeah, and I want to dive into all that, but I want to start with what I think is one of the favorite audience the questions that one of the questions that the audience likes the most, which is taking you all the way back. How did you play as a child growing up in Burlington?
How did I play? Well, I mean, I do think that my upbringing had a lot to do with how and why I am what I am, who I am. Had a little brother. We were pretty close growing up, still are, and playing sports and all that sort of thing. My mom was a superintendent. My mom was actually retired as a superintendent, but she was a teacher. She was really involved in special education. Became a principal and superintendent of special education. So my mom would always say that you need to live what you profess. So she was really committed to the idea of inclusion, of the idea of providing opportunities for students with special needs and supporting families. And so we participated in something called the Extended Family Program. And that was basically like a respite program where we had, we called her our sister. She lived with us until she was 16, Deanna. And she would have what we would know now to be maybe complex autism. At the time, it was, we just knew her as having a developmental disability. So that was just the way that we lived our life. And I ended up working then at camps growing up, like as summer jobs. I worked at camps for teenagers with special needs. And it was just something that I really connected with. I like the idea of making connections sometimes with people that maybe have a difficult time making connections, or serving families that might be struggling for a variety of reasons. And so that was my elementary school, high school, and when I went off to university, I went into the concurrent ed program, and so that kind of put me on the pathway toward education. But I also certainly think my mom had a huge influence on that.
Is there anything about your upbringing that you wish kids today could experience?
Hell, it'll make me sound old for sure, but I have two daughters. My oldest is 19, so she's going into second year, and my youngest is going into high school, going into grade 9 this year. And I don't think I'll say anything that hasn't been said many times before, people of my age or my generation, but I just was talking recently about how much we don't think we appreciated that before the advent of the mobile phones and certainly social media and things like that, you could only be where you were, and whatever you were doing was what you were doing. There was a level of trust, in with your parents, that when you were out, that you would do the right thing. You would be home by the when the street lights came on, that sort of old notion. And I remember my parents used to put the television away for 6 months of the year. They actually rolled it into the crawl space so that we wouldn't watch too much TV, and so that we get outside and do things. And the first day you might complain, but then we just got outside and did things. And so I guess what I wish that my daughters would experience more than what we experienced was just that sense of being present. And I don't think that I don't think we knew what we were experiencing at the time enough to savor it. And I wish that I would have. But I look back and I recognize that wherever I was, that's where I was. Whereas now, wherever you are, you're also connected to multiple people in multiple places doing a multitude of different things. That's not only distracting, but also causes, fear of missing out and missing out on opportunities of seeing. I just like that when I was somewhere, that's where I was. And that who I was with was who I was with. And I don't know that this generation or any generation will ever actually experience that again. And I think that that's too bad.
Other people have expressed it, but that's why I keep asking the question, because everyone expresses it differently. I actually never thought about it in terms of, the ability to be present and be in the moment more. I always thought it was like people didn't do that or kids are not doing that because they're on their devices and they're distracted away from each other. But it's a great point. Even when they're with each other, they're still connected to, the entire globe. So I think that's a great point. You mentioned
where you were, they had to leave a message, and you'd get back to them, and that was reasonable. Now there's a sense of, I texted you 5 minutes ago. Why haven't you called me back?
Yeah. What's going on? Why haven't you responded?
Yeah.
Social relationships are certainly going to be very different over the next 20 years than they have been in the past. I was saying that you mentioned briefly your overview and your educational journey. Mm-hmm. Is there something in particular that you studied along the way that really has impacted how you think and the kind of work you do today?
I really like the idea of ideas. I think ideas and ideals matter. So I love reading philosophy. I love thinking about thinking. I like epistemology. I like how do we know what we know? And I guess something that really kind of struck me is the idea of it's important to have ideals, and that ideals matter. And I would make the distinction between ideals and idealistic or idealism, because sometimes you think of being idealistic as being pie in the sky sort of things that are just wishing and hoping. But I actually think that ideals matter because they should be that creative what if. What if we could create a school in which every student felt welcome, teachers were, feeling confident and good with the work that they're doing? What if every student felt like when they walked in the building they were loved? What if that's our creative ideal? That would be the ideal, right? So when we have those ideals, then our work as leaders and teachers is we think, well, what do we need to do to create a pathway toward getting there? What are the conditions that we need to put into place to try to create conditions where these things are possible? And I think it's important when you think that way to recognize that ideals aren't measured by whether or not you ever achieve them. They're measured by whether or not they're pointing us in an educationally defensible direction. So things that I studied in school when I really thought about that idea of optimism versus meliorism, right? To be optimistic is to hope better futures are possible. To be melioristic means that better futures are possible because of the requirement of human intervention, that we can make better futures possible. So I did, as a teacher and as a principal, try to think about what's the ideal. Like if everything was going perfectly, what would that look like? So then what do I need to do to help to set that up, knowing it will never be perfect? Perfection is not possible. So therefore, you'll never achieve the ideal. But is that ideal something worth striving towards? And if so, how are we going to get there? So those are things where, from a school perspective, I do like playing with ideas, and they do land with me, and I sit with them, and I try to think about how they can impact what we do. Now, my daughter is going into second year in philosophy, so she's just like her dad, I guess. She just likes to play with ideas.
Well, and like your friendly neighborhood podcast host. Did you formally study philosophy at university?
No, my undergrad was in dramatic literature. So I studied. Like, it's funny when we talk about the perception of expertise that teachers and principals have to have, right? You think that we're going to solve this issue and this issue and this issue. It's like, I was studying Harold Pinter and playwrights, and then for my master's degree, so after Teachers College, my master's degree was really focused on more around sociological ideas and teaching. And then for my PhD, I had to dig into philosophy a lot more. It's a doctorate in philosophy. So you really had to spend a lot of time with that before kind of getting into some specific areas. But what I would say about some of my time spent in dramatic literature and actually being around the department and having the opportunity to go up on stage and do things certainly helped me as a teacher, definitely helped me as a principal. But today, I might be an introvert by nature, but I don't have any problem going up on stage. Like I feel comfortable with a microphone on stage, being able to articulate ideas or be able to engage in conversations in authentic ways. Whereas I might struggle maybe even in a cocktail party. But for me to get up on stage with the lights, that's no problem for me. And I can't help but think that some of my time spent as an undergrad helped with that.
Yeah, I mean, I as a double major in literature and philosophy, I'd completely agree. And my dad's advice to me was learn how to think, and then you'll be able to find the jobs later on. And I really think we're entering into an era where that is more true now than ever, because getting trained for specific jobs is going to be difficult given the rise and power of AI. But since we're on the topic, I have a kind of pet project that's not even off the ground, but it's in the ideation phase. I want to support districts all across Canada, the world, in understanding the importance of having, and maybe it's a ministry thing, a formal philosophy course as part of the prerequisites, because to me, it's the foundation for everything else. And like I just mentioned, in particularly now, when AI is raising all kinds of questions, to go back to your earlier wonderful point about developing ethics, developing empathy, developing critical thinking. To me, it's the core. Have you ever thought about what that would look like in the formal high school setting?
I mean, I'll answer that two ways. First, let me answer your last question first. We do in Ontario. In Catholic education, the grade 12 religion credit is a lot about philosophy. So the first couple of years, the grade 9 and grade 10 are really focused on faith formation, the church, and history, and that. And then it gets into in grade 11, 12, you get into world religions, and you get into philosophy.
So world religions was one of my favorite courses, as you could probably guess, because I did go through the Catholic system. But by the ministry standards, I don't think there's any sort of, proper philosophical course. I'm not saying those are not proper philosophical, but like just really the history of philosophical thinking. And you can do the Western traditions, you can do the Eastern traditions, because I think that just formalizing will will help, just like they have to take English credits, right? I just think that formalizing of that way of investigating and maybe more importantly, appreciating ideas, very different ideas, would be useful for a whole generation of kids.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have a focus on, and a focus on that I like within Ontario on, focusing on tech, being a real push on skilled trades, using our high school majors, really making sure that we're setting kids up for success. Because not all students, we all go on different pathways, workforce, college, apprenticeships, university. So I like those focuses because I think a lot of students need that sort of, that pathway, and we do a lot of hands-on work that really helps. I think what we do in those grade 11, grade 12 courses is give kids a taste of, how to dig deeper. And the second part of my answer to that would be that, thinking about my own daughter, who happens to be at university, we don't look at university as being necessarily a pathway to employment, though I know a lot of people do. For us, university is really about ideas, about learning, expanding your thinking, but to be doing so in a way that you could do anything. So when she said, I want to go into philosophy, I want to, what are you going to do with that? Well, there's always different pathways from teaching to research to law, to all these different sort of ways in which philosophy. So it's a really foundational sort of approach that I think that you could go off and do anything with. So I guess it depends on the student. Different students do different things. So us being able to provide pathways and opportunities for kids that need different things in different ways, and that's what we try to do.
Well, I appreciate that. I'll have to articulate the idea maybe a little bit more as I go along here, but I love that connection. So if we can pivot maybe to your journey through your career, and if I can ask you to reflect on, what makes a really great classroom? And you can glean on your experience as a principal, a teacher, or even as a superintendent. What are some of the most inspiring classrooms like that you've seen?
I would almost borrow from something I haven't written it yet, but I'm probably going to say something about this next week. So I'm not sure when this airs, but next week we've got our annual general meeting, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this because it's very doable within the context of, no matter, you don't need the latest technology or everyone to be hooked up online, or you don't need the learning spaces or the different types of desks and all that sort of thing. What I think is the most important is that every student walks into that classroom, they know that you love them. They know that when they're in your room, that they're safe, and that they're safe because they know that they're loved. Something that I say I've said this all the time, certainly as a director. I've got two girls. And for a while here in Toronto Catholic, I would say, I've got a daughter in elementary and a daughter in secondary. If you're their teacher and I'm getting to know you, I care about what you studied. I'm happy for the degrees you have, your interests, your passions, what you're qualified to teach, what your interests are. I care deeply about those things. But that doesn't matter to me as much as that I know that you love my girls. And if you love my girls, you've got me. As a parent, we can do anything together. So I think that's the most important thing. And I think that is what we are all capable, not only capable of, but called to do when we're thinking about every student that walks into our classroom. Because some students come from situations in which they present in ways in which might make it difficult to love and care for. And that's when we have to lean in even more so. And I think that those teachers, you can think back in your own life and you can probably name them. And it wasn't because they were really great at something, and it wasn't that amazing lesson that they did that went off really well. You remember them because you know that they loved you. And that is the most important thing that any teacher can and should be thoughtful about. I'm going to be speaking at we have a big Safe School Symposium for the City of Toronto with school boards and community housing and police, and where everyone's there together. And I know I've got a little time to speak at it. When I do, and I did last year and I will again this year, is that when you think about safe schools, It's good that we have processes and protocols and partnerships with our community agencies. It's good that we have drills and safety and rules. It's good that we have all of those things. Those are really important. But I think we go a long way towards creating safe, healthy classrooms if the kids know that they're loved. And if every student, if we're going back to ideals, what if we could create a classroom in which every student felt that they were loved and included and welcome? What if we could create a school in which every student who walked through that door knew that they were loved and their parents knew that they were loved? What if we could do that? So that, I think, is a bit of a game changer. And what we do is we try to be thoughtful about that, but create our structures and the way that we are with people in ways in which live that out.
What do you think are some of the conditions that need to change or need to be improved or supported for that to happen, at scale?
I actually think the beautiful thing about it is you don't need anything but people who are willing to do it. There's no resource that I can provide you that will, as a teacher, that will make you be able to be obvious about the fact that every student feels loved, included, and safe. I don't need to provide you with anything. I need you to commit to it, and I need you to be the kind of teacher, which we have, honestly, in abundance across this system. Every time I go into a school, I just meet these teachers that know the kids so intimately. They know what they leave every morning. They know what they go home to every night. They are caring and compassionate. And those kids, when they know that, I think it's a game changer. I don't know that I need to provide them with any more resources, but I do need to provide them with encouragement and that ideal and that recognition that is probably one of the single most important things when a kid comes to school.
What would you say are some of the most important things for parents to understand about the public system?
The importance of partnership. That teachers and principals and superintendents, we all get into this work because we love kids. We love seeing kids be successful. We want to see, as a parent, we want to see your child be as successful as possible. So the idea of creating a safe communication that is focused on partnership, but really focused on the best interests of their child and our student, goes a really, really long way. The more that we're open, the more that we're sharing, the more that we are, the more that parent knows that you love their child, the much easier it is to deal with some of those difficult situations. When you have to make that phone call because something happened, and part of our role is being corrective, is being, having to talk about things like discipline and making sure that we're helping to put them on the right path, instilling them with the appropriate values and ethics. That's part of our job. I mean, in Ontario, there is, we have that idea of in loco parentis, which means that a teacher is held to the standard of a prudent parent. So when a child is with that teacher all day long, they are expected to, and we would expect, and the law would expect that teacher acts like a reasonable, prudent parent would act for that child. That's a big responsibility. So that sort of shared understanding between parents and teachers is really important, and just keeping that communication open.
So if we turn to your work all across, the Greater Toronto area, you've worked for some of the largest districts in Canada, and probably one of the largest in the world, if not North America. What's that like? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? Can you give the audience a sense of just what it's like to be on the inside of these really, really big districts?
I'm going to answer that by talking about what it's been like in both, because when I was in Halton Catholic, we were like a large to medium-sized board in comparison to the Toronto boards. So from that perspective, I felt like we could do things that we were big enough to matter, but small enough to be nimble. So when we would take on a large project, we could scale it across the system, but we were talking 55 schools. In Toronto, that's 4 times the size of that. And in Toronto District, a greater multiple. So we could do things. There's a couple, projects and things that we did when I was in Halton in a smaller school that I'm very proud of, that I think has really kind of rethought education a little bit, certainly around for students with special needs. And I think that it was more possible because we were in a smaller place, because it was big enough to see that this is actually we can scale this, but small enough that we could, really kind of dig in and understand what was happening to move the needle. In the large boards, Toronto District and Toronto Catholic, it's definitely harder it's a bigger boat to be able to start to turn in different directions. In the district board, 583 different individual locations is a lot. That's a lot of hearts and minds. That's a lot of resources. That's a lot of strategy to move things in different directions. In 200 schools here in Toronto Catholic. But the amazing thing about it is that when we do, it actually really matters, in that everybody else, like it or not, is actually looking at what's happening in Toronto. So all the Catholic boards would be looking at, in some ways, or they couldn't help but notice, because we get the media attention because of our size. So when we do things, it's not that other boards follow. It's just that there's a spotlight on it. And when you do things, good things for the right reasons, we end up not only influencing what's happening in this board, we actually end up influencing the province. So that is humbling as well. But so you do have to think about, how do you scale a lot of this work that we're doing. But getting that to be humming along in 200 different locations is, I think anybody could appreciate the complexity. But even when you're that ideal idea, even when you have the ideal and you start to point in that direction, people notice, and other people, if you're doing the right thing, get on board.
So a lot of principals tune in, and I think folks that are, at least have an eye to, being a superintendent and or director across the country. What would you say are the most important aspects of leading, in your case, these big districts?
Leading a big district. So for me, I'm trying to think, I want to try to scale this for the audience that you described, because for me, it was a big jump. It's a big jump from teacher to vice principal. It's a big jump from vice principal to principal. It's a big jump from principal to superintendent, and then Toronto, and then to director. But each step along the way, the further I get in my career, the more I realize that it was never about me. But the further you get in your career, you realize that it really is not about me. And so when you're leading a system this size, you have to have a good team. You have to trust that team, and you have to allow them the latitude while remaining accountable. So in a smaller board, and I might even talk to director colleagues who might be able to be really hands-on in some ways, because it's a smaller group of people that we're talking with and can really be engaged in. And in some ways, I'm a little removed from that because of the different layers, because we're just so large. I mean, our superintendents are each responsible for 25 schools each, times 8 different superintendents. And so my influence has to be through my executive team to my senior team to the principals. So it's really humbling, because you realize that you can't be everywhere, nor would I want to be, nor should I be. But it is, from a leadership perspective, you can't do this unless you get the right people in place and then trust them to do the work. So for me, what that means is, it was actually a really good learning experience. And I'll go from spec ed to Toronto Catholic, but it was a really good learning experience when I was in spec ed, and I had my senior team around the table. And my senior team was some of my academic leads. But then I have the chief of psychology, chief social worker, chief speech and language pathologist, our head of our educational assistants. So it's a whole room full of people, 3 of which, report to different colleges. So the College of Psychologists, the College of Social Workers, I have behavior therapists in the room on that senior team. They all ran their sort of teams. And you realize that I can't be the best psychologist. I'm not a psychologist. I can't be the best. So it's not about me. It's about, how do I articulate a vision of what are we collectively doing together? How does everyone understand their role, how that contributes to it? And then I want to have an understanding of how they're executing that vision with their team, but I want them to know that I trust them, that they do the work, that that I trust them to lead their team, so their credibility is important. And the same as when I am here in the Toronto Catholic Board, my directors council is made up of my associate director on the business side. He oversees all corporate services. My associate director on the academic side, all the academic team. Then I've got my CFO, the CIO, my head of comms, my head of the legal department, my executive of HR, and my executives responsible for the field and curriculum. A lot of those people that I named, they're not my scope of practice. My job as the leader is to always be talking about how are we all heading in the same direction, what are our roles, but then ultimately trust. But we have weekly meetings, we have weekly touch bases plus ongoing all the time. So I'm very involved and understand what's going on, but they also know that I trust them to do the work. I mean, I had a really interesting learning experience once as a principal on that idea of trust as a leader. And maybe I'm wandering. I'll just tell you the story. You can do whatever you want with it. But it was a really good learning experience for me about what the idea of trust was. Actually, it's one thing to say that you trust. It's another thing to actually live it. So I'm a first-year principal. I'm at a principal's meeting. So we're out of the building, and we're all gathered together in a central location, all the principals. This was me in Halton Catholic. So when I was a principal of a 450-ish student school, so I did not have a vice principal. So when you leave the building, you need to leave someone in charge. So some boards call them teacher in charge, principal designate, but essentially it's a teacher that acts in the role of the leadership role at the school for the day while the principal's out of the building for something. So I'm at this event and I'm sitting between two mentors of mine. One, I was her vice principal. The other, I was on his staff when I was a teacher, and I really respect both of them then and to this day. So I get a phone call during the break, and it is from my teacher in charge, and she's telling me, "Hey, this just happened. This is what's going on. But this kind of event happened. Honestly, I don't remember what it was, but at the time it was a big deal. Felt like a big deal. So I said, okay, let me get back to you. So I hung up, and both mentors on either side said, what happened or what's going on? So I told them. The principal on this side said to me, well, you better get back there. You need to show everyone that you're the principal. You better, take control of the situation. And you're 6 months into the role. You better show that you're in charge. That was the principal on that side. Principal on this side said, when you left this morning, did you tell your teacher in charge that you trusted her? And I said, yes, I did. And he said, if you go back there, if you just pull into the parking lot, you're not only going to tell her, but you're going to tell the entire staff and building that you actually don't trust her. So it's up to you. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but just know that when you go back, if you said you trust her, you told the whole building, she's in charge today, but you pull back in, remember that you're always sending a message. So I thought about it, and I called her back, and I said, okay, let's talk through it. And then just said, okay, you've got this. And I let her, and she did have it. And it worked out fine. And she was set up for more success because that trust really kind of had that sense of, okay, well, he said he trusted me, but then when it came down to it, he did trust me. And I did find that to be a really important learning experience for me, because not only that idea of trust, but also that idea that you're always sending a message. So that line that he said to me, he said, you don't have to say a word. You just have to pull back into the parking lot, and you're actually going to tell everybody that you don't. So to run an organization this size, there has to be that element of trust and respect attached to accountability. Ultimately, the buck stops with me. So if things go awry somewhere, I will have to wear it. So I do want to know what's going on, and there's regular touch bases. But those touch bases are just about helping me with that high-level understanding so that they can do the work with their teams. And what I think that we have here in Toronto Catholic would be a really highly effective group of senior leaders and around Directors Council who all respect each other. And we sit in that room and we bat ideas around, try to get out of our silos and just talk about ideas. But when we leave the table, they're leading their teams knowing that we all have complete faith in their ability to do so. I think a mistake for any leader who gets too into the weeds in an operational way, you could be sending the wrong message. So as much as you want to be involved and engaged with people, if you don't let people do their job, you're telling them that you don't trust them and you are going to diminish their capacity to contribute. The more you can build people up and make sure that they know that you trust them because you say you trust them, but also by your actions reveal that you do, your team's going to click on all cylinders. And when that team leaves that room clicking on all cylinders, good things are happening. And the converse would be if you try to micromanage a bunch of different sectors of the organization, many of which are not your scope of practice or your skill set. When you become the CEO, you couldn't possibly, like, I'm not a labor lawyer and I'm not, a comms expert. And I'm like, there's a lot of things that you're not. My job is to oversee the organization, have the right people in place, hold them accountable, but then let them do their job. And if you don't do that, and if you micromanage an organization of this size, you'll burn yourself out and you'll undermine your staff. So that was a big learning experience for me in the big boards, in my board. That's how you run an effective team. And I'm proud of this team. I've never worked with I don't want to say, we have a really good team here. Like I hate saying I've never worked with a better group of people. I've worked with amazing people all along the way. So I wouldn't diminish like these unbelievable people I've learned from every step of the way, from a first year teacher to now. But my goodness, the group that I have around me now is like high performing.
Fantastic. I think that's one of the most articulate views from the inside of what it's like to, manage a large organization, in particular a school board, because I think a lot of people lose sight of the complexities of it all.
Right.
One of the things that I've, had shared on this podcast with me from other guests and have shared with people often is, when something happens in the giant city of Toronto, it's always a parent, a family, first responder from the school district. So there's always things that are happening that, we don't like I kind of posed, she's like, well, why don't we teach philosophy? Well, there's a lot of things going on all the time, and it's very complex, and I really appreciate how you articulated that. Is there, along the way, Toronto Catholic or otherwise, substantial initiative that you were part of that you're really proud of?
I really, I could name a lot of things. Let me try to, that came across the right way. Cause I've been involved and worked with some amazing people along the way. Something we developed in one of my time as a superintendent of special education, I'm pretty proud of an initiative, a project, something that we did, because I think it had a bigger impact. Our problem of practice was we were trying to wrestle with the idea of the allocation of educational assistance in special education. There's always a sense of we don't have enough. There's always people looking for more, and of course we're always struggling from a budget perspective. And and also that sense of how are we allocating these resources? Is it equitable, and is it done right? And that was what started this work. But what we actually dug into is a really student-focused way to approach resource allocation that actually began to change mindsets around student needs and student independence. So there's a couple of key things that happened to me when I was early in my career as a superintendent of spec ed. And I remember having a conversation with a parent one time, and the parent was actually from a different school board. I was at an event. And she said to me, I was that parent, and she did this. I was going to fight every step of the way to make sure that my son got what I thought he needed, and that was full-time educational assistant for his career. Every time they tried to, adjust that schedule, I would fight every step of the way. And I was successful. And now here I am, and it's March, and he's 21, and he's graduating this June, and I'm terrified about what's going to come once he leaves the school system. And I wish that I would have fought for independence more than I fought for this. At the next week, I had a phone call from a parent who called me and just kind of got really, and I took the call and I spoke with this parent and said, I'm going to sue you. I'm going to sue the board because I understand you're cutting my daughter's EA support from 1.0 to 0.75, and you're taking away this valuable support to you, and I'm not going to stand for it. I'm going to sue you. And she's going to because she's going to be credit earning in high school and she's going to go to college, and that's how dare you take the support away. And I said, okay, well, hold on a second. How old's your daughter? Like, let's talk about this. He said, well, she's in grade 6. And I said, and she's got a full-time educational assistant. And he said, yeah. I said, okay. There are lots of exceptions and for different reasons, but typically speaking, a student with a full-time educational assistant, going into grade 8 or grade 9, there's not a lot that are credit earning, let alone on the pathway that you're thinking of. And we talked through it, and we really realized that he thought he was doing the right thing to advocate for a very capable daughter getting like extra help. But he's really diminishing her opportunities. And because, the more independent somebody is, a student is, the better opportunities that they have. So that landed with me with both of those conversations, because I thought, that's on me. That's on us as the school system. Parents are doing everything they think that they can to get the most support for their children. Why wouldn't they? And then at the end of the day, they're let down because they graduate without the skill set to be able to do whatever, or they, we have more support and then they go off into an assisted living situation. They require more support and it's expensive. And so what we decided to do was we created something called the Independence Rubric. And we created a rubric based on trying to assess a student's level of independence. And this was a complete 180 inversion on how we thought about the allocation of resources before. Before, it was always about how needy is this student?
How much support they need. So
there would be a simple way we developed a rubric and then an algorithm that help us to determine, but I'll get to that in a second. But the basic idea you'd say, we need an EA for this student. Well, why? Well, they're a runner. They'll run and leave the building. Okay, so how often? Every period? Every day? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? Like, what are we talking about? So to try to really look at what actual level of independence do they have, as opposed to making decisions based on the perception of the highest level of need. We need to know how independent they are. So we developed a rubric that considered behavior, considered academic, considered toileting, considered social, all those sort of things, and really tried to assess where a student, how much assistance do they need, but through the lens of how independent are they. And we would sit down. So what we did was develop this, and we sent our consultants out to the system to sit down at schools and talk about students that they were applying for support for, to really understand what their needs are. And I know that you think, well, we're just going to say that everyone is high level, but you can't say that a student needs support with toileting for the whole 300 minutes every day. Do you know what I mean? Like you can't say that they're a runner when you're really saying that it's happened once in the last 3 months. So we and it was hard. So we talked through that, and basically at the end of it, you came up with the number of points, and then we used all those together, put it into an allocation rate. We used the actual number of EAs, because what was happening before was we go out in the system, we'd get all this data to say that these schools need this many educational assistants, and we'd come back and we'd say, well, we have 450 EAs, but this data says you've promised 600. So we'd have to go back and either spend more money that we didn't have, or make reductions. So we had to change the way people thought about the allocation of our resources. So number one, by using the allocation tool, the rubric and the allocation tool, what it would do is it would generate the number of EAs per school based on the needs. And what we wanted to do was take away the subjectivity of people being able to say things that might influence more so than what the actual needs are, so that the system would know that everyone's doing this, so that nobody's getting more or less in different regions. We're all kind of going through this together. And what we learned when we did that is that that gets you about 80% of the way there. It's almost like AI now, right? It gets you about 80% of the way there, but the real work was by hand. Like, does this make sense? What are the other things we're not thinking about? And then we would be able to do allocations that way. So what it did was it created a consistent tool to be used across the system that everyone else was using, so everyone knew we were looking at this from the same way. But I think that the bigger thing was that we started to change our conversations around student needs and toward more support equals better outcomes to student independence.
Hmm.
You have a conversation with a parent when they come in kindergarten and they want to have full-time EA support for their child for whatever their needs are. So then you start having a conversation. Okay, but by the time they get to grade 6, what are we hoping? By high school, what are we thinking? Well, I would love, that they didn't by the time they get to high school. Okay, let's work that backwards. So hopefully we get this full-time support now, but wouldn't it be great if by grade 3 that was about half? And wouldn't we celebrate by grade 6 if they only needed a touch base here and there because of their level of independence? Because that's what's setting them up for success. So it changes the whole narrative from that conversation I had with that parent that used the words, you're cutting EA support or you're reducing EA support, to be thinking about how are we celebrating the increasing of independence. It's a different phone call to a parent when you say, hey, we're cutting EA support because of whatever reason, budget or whatever, to be able to say, guess what? This is what we've been seeing over the last little while. We've been an amazing process. We're seeing some tremendous independence. We're going to increase their level of independence as opposed to reducing support. And we're celebrating that every step of the way. So it did change the way that people started talking about and understanding what support means, what are our goals and outcomes, and how to change the narrative both with our staff but also with parents about if we're really going to be thoughtful about the best interests of students, we have to be thoughtful about how we're setting them up to be as successful as possible. And the degree to which a student is independent by the time they leave us is the degree to which they have more opportunities, whether it's in any of the trades or work or university, or if it's going to student in a full care situation. The level of care they need will determine how much money it costs. So the more independent they are, the better they are, the better opportunities that they have. And it also roots that idea that every student can learn. And if we truly believe that every student can learn, that goes, from the kids that are playing with string theory and going to go off to math at Waterloo, to the kids that, are hopefully they learn to feed themselves and dress themselves, and that everyone can learn and everyone can take steps. So I was proud of that. In a way, it was really neat because you realize that the development of a tool helped lead to a change in mindset. And you can't say that we believe in independence, though, and still do things the way that we used to do them. But you also can't create this tool to, allocate resources without being very clear about what we believe in. So we have to be clear about what we believe in, and then we develop our practices to support that. They work in tandem. And through the use of that tool, thinking about independence, thinking about evaluating students' needs from an independence perspective, it started to change the mindset in the system. And that's something that they continue to use. They use in the district board as well, and we're implementing here in Toronto Catholic as well. So it's something that I'm proud of because of the bigger picture, because of the change in the idea of what it means to support students with special needs.
Well, I hope other superintendents and directors across the country and elsewhere hear this example and reach out to you to talk about it, because it sounds like a wonderful example of how you can make some significant change.
It's living what you say you believe, and I think that it's important. It's important to have structure in order to be able to move ideals forward. I remember I was teaching before I became a director, because I had to give up teaching, but I was teaching at taught at Brock University and Charles Sturt University in their master's program, and we were doing a class one time. We were talking about structure versus freedom. And it was this amazing thing I would give credit for this group for talking about. And we're talking about the idea of having structures in place and that idea of freedom and how do they kind of connect together. And they talked about a kite. And they said a kite is a nice example of that. I asked them to explain it. So it's their idea. I love it, though. Is that the kite needs the string to tether it to the ground. It needs that structure in order to fly. So the freedom of flight of that kite catching the air requires the structure of the string to be so. Otherwise, without it, if you let it go, it just flutters away and crashes. So in order to be free, in order to move ideas forward, and in order to be thoughtful about what's possible, it can't just be about throwing ideas around and, without actually doing anything about it, because then they will flutter and crash to the ground. it is about creating the structures and processes in place to be able to do so, because those structures are what will allow for the flight.
It's a great metaphor. So, Brendan, as we wrap, I've got a couple more questions, and I'd like you to, put on your, I guess, Marty McFly jacket and jump into a time machine and look at education 50 years in the future. What does that look like to you?
It's a good question, because you ask a question like that, and I really resist the idea that's got anything to do with technological advances. I really think that an ongoing and consistent approach to education should be about developing the minds of students to become young adults and people that are going out into the world who are critical thinkers, who are able to discern fact from fiction, can think for themselves, can wrestle with ideas, can be comfortable in gray. I think that a big part of my career and maybe my own journey is that I enjoy not knowing what I'm doing. I would be in an interview and say, I don't mind working my way through gray. It's almost like when I finally figure something out and say, okay, I've got this, then it's time for me to go be overwhelmed again. And that's just the way that I kind of am. And I realized that maybe that's moved me along in my career the way that I've gone, because I thought once I've got that sense of settling, I need to not know what I'm doing again. So as we think about the future, I actually think that's not a bad way to be if you want to be involved in what's possible. Because we need to, and we do move beyond the idea of we're not learning a text or a template or a chart, and once we know that, then we can take whatever next step. We have no idea what's going to be in place in the future. And I'm saying something that they said 20 years ago, that the careers or the things that people are going to be involved with 20 years from now do not exist today. And that was the case then to now, and it will be the case now into the future. So I think what is important through all of that is that we continue to be curious. We continue to be able to ask questions, that we don't take, especially now, my goodness, that we don't take whatever's out there at its face value, that we ask good questions that are backed by data and logic and rational reason, that we listen to other people. And I mean, really listen, which I would not be a good example of on this podcast, because you just asked me to talk. I'm doing all the talking.
Oh, I'm the listener, and so is the audience. So we're good. We're good here.
The listening is just an undervalued and underutilized leadership skill. So I really think it's almost like my daughter, me being really comfortable with and loving her choice of major as being in philosophy, learning how to think. I think that might be, and that's going to be fuel for your goal for the courses. But I really think that going into the future, it's going to continue to be discerning, thoughtful leaders, critical thinkers, people that are going to be comfortable not knowing answers, but can be able to work through to solutions, that are comfortable with not being handed the manual, but might be comfortable with figuring out how to create the manual. Or if there would be a manual, but you know what I mean.
Writing the new one.
Yeah, or just getting comfortable with there's no point because it's going to keep evolving, and we're going to keep going with it.
My penultimate question is always, if you had a magic wand and you could do anything to the education system, there are no limits to this, what would you do?
A magic wand could influence people. People are the most important part of the system. 85% of my budget is people. A $1.3 billion budget, most of it is people. My magic wand would influence them every morning, that no matter what they left, from that morning or the night before, that magic wand would remove, if there's a cloud there, that it would dissipate, that would allow them to see and be thoughtful about and recognize the gratitude to be able to influence people moving forward, so that every staff member that walks into the building feels privileged to have the opportunity to spend another day with some amazing kids, and that those kids then would feel that and know that, and that's moving us a lot closer to the ideal. So that magic wand would I guess really want to influence the ways in which all of our staff continue to focus that attention on loving and including and nurturing and caring for every student in their building and being obvious about it. It's that old thing. It's, sometimes we need to do something. We have to be seen to be doing something. We need to, it's actually a quote from John Bosco, but it's that every child needs to be loved, but every child needs to know that they're loved. So my magic wand would have that influence that everybody, as soon as they walked into the parking lot, walking into the building of that school, whatever was going it would become focused on that same goal every day. I think that the potential of our kids is limitless when we can create conditions like that.
That's beautiful. Last question is always, what book, movie, podcast, article, music album would you recommend to the audience? You can pick one or two. I just like to vary the options for you.
You just want to pick like a album or a movie? Wow.
Very few people pick albums. Like, let's start there. What's an album that Brendan Browne just adores?
Yeah, sure. In Rainbows by Radiohead is almost perfect.
Great choice. Yeah,
it's almost, to me, it's almost perfect. I mean, that is it's funny. The cool. I love Radiohead. You asked me to pick an album, and In Rainbows is mind blowing. My daughter, my 14-year-old, is a bass, plays bass, and she just formed a band, and the band practices out of the drummer's garage, and they got the tea lights in there, and it's really cool. Like 14-year-olds creating a band, I think, is like the greatest thing in the world.
Yeah, it's such a throwback.
Yeah. She'll kill me for saying this, but the name of the band is The Flippers, and they're awesome. She comes home and plays me a tune that they're working. They're working on "Smells Like Teen Spirit," Nirvana, and I'm listening to it, and I'm prepared in my mind to say, "Oh, that's really good," and I'm listening to it, going like, "Holy wow, that's good!" Like, drummer's great, guitarist is in, my daughter's in the pocket, like, it's fantastic. She's a massive Radiohead fan too, and we just kind of bond over it. And when things, like, just for my Father's Day, she bought me a Radiohead live album, like a vinyl. But two of us would probably say the album that I would put on over and over again and never get sick of is In Rainbows.
Awesome. Well, Brendan, thank you for the wonderful conversation. I have many takeaways from this conversation, and not the least of which is I think you raise very cool kids, my man. Well done.
I'm proud of them. They're two really neat girls. My wife, they take after their mom. My wife is she's all the credit.
Smart man. Give credit where credit's due. With that, Brendan Browne, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Jason. It's a pleasure.
This podcast is recorded on the territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Bucheri. Until next time.